Gregory Maguire. This is so fun. I think the last time that I got to interview you professionally, I mean, we chatted on Oz Talk with Tori, which was certainly fun as always, but we also did the virtual Oz Con back in 2020, like a month into COVID. Do you remember that?
I certainly do remember that. What an adventure that was, and how smart you were to try to find ways to bring consolation and nourishment to people who were, we all were, terrified out of our wits about what we were facing, without knowing its metes and bounds yet.
And I was so grateful to you for joining me then. And I think at that time you dropped the good news bomb that you were working on the Another Day series, and that was really exciting. And that brings us to such a full circle moment. I mean, Elphie is such a treat of a read. Congrats on this novel. I love it so much. And it's really meeting the moment of Wicked's cultural significance because it can tide fans over between Wicked Part 1 and Wicked for Good, the movie adaptation. So, what inspired this prequel?
Well, what didn't inspire it is my attempt to jump on the bandwagon and harvest some filthy lucre because it was to be had. I say that honorably because, in fact, money has never been of great interest to me. You can tell. I'm my shabby self and always will be. But in fact, I began to think with the approach of the film, before I knew what the film would look like or whether it would be any good or what the performances or mise en scène would be like, I thought this intellectual property that I have generated is going to outlast me. It's, the characters of that Baum wrote about are already eternal. Dorothy, the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, the Lion, the Wizard, etc. Even the Wicked Witch of the West. But even the characters that I have added to the mix, like Dr. Dillamond and Madame Morrible and Chistery and Fierro and Bach, they are going to last for a long time too, and beyond my span of years on this green planet. So I thought, I'm going to kick off someday, and somebody's going to look back at my work and say, well, gee, interesting. Maguire never told us anything about between the time Elphaba was born and the time she went to college. That's ripe material. Let's get it. Let's tell it ourselves. Of course, they'll have the rights, arguing with my lawyers and my literary executor to do whatever is agreeable. On the other hand, I thought, why should I let somebody else tell what her life was like? I'm the one who knows. I know what Quadland Country looks like and feels like. I know who her mother is and her father and what her feelings are about Nessa Rose, and even her feelings about her younger brother who doesn't show up in the movie or the Broadway play. So I might as well tell it now while I still have lifetime and a little bit of intellect still fizzing underneath my bald head.
Or a lot fizzing there, Gregory. Let's be. You've been quoted as saying when you were mulling over and creating the novel Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, that it was spawned from you asking the question of what is evil, what makes one wicked. We certainly see that in the adaptation on stage and screen as well. Was there a question you were asking or seeking an answer to in this prequel, Elfie?
It was not as clear and global a question as what is evil? What do we mean when we use the words evil or wicked? And how does somebody get to be evil? And what if they're not? It wasn't as large and global a set of questions as that, which I think are probably the most important questions I've asked myself in my life in some ways. But they were nonetheless urgent questions to me because, Ryan, as you know, and as some readers of my fiction will know, Elphaba comes from a kind of dysfunctional family, like most of us, and her mother is a kind of slightly sozzled high society scion who leaves the cushy environs in which she was raised to go off and be a minister's wife in the soggy backwater country of Quadling Country. He is not the governor of Munchkinland in my work, the way he's presented on the stage and in the screen. He's an itinerant pastor trying to save the pagans. We don't think as highly of that as we used to. He's a kind of evangelist, and he thinks he's right, and anything else that anybody else believes must be wrong. So talk about falling between two stools. Elphaba's mother can hardly keep her clothes on, and her father is full of rectitude and right thinking. So what does this do to a child to have those two impulses uh, governing her life, as it were? Uh, and if she's not well taken care of by her parents, then how does she grow? How does she develop? How does she become smart enough and capable enough and trained enough to be ready to go to college and to actually sit an exam and get accepted into a college? These were questions that I didn't know the answers of exactly. I knew there were one or two things that would have to happen in Elphie. I had mentioned them in Wicked. One of them was there's a scene in Wicked in which Elphaba stands and sings, and the
Mhm.
narrator says Elphaba had a good voice. She used to sing during her father's missionary work in Quadling country. Well, I knew that as a fact, but I didn't know what and how and why it would work. And so I wanted to like sharpen the focus and change the focal depth of my understanding of the story so I could see what it was for Elphaba to open her mouth and sing for the first time. Now, Ryan, you know, because you know my work very well, that Elphaba could sing long before Stephen Schwartz got a hold of her. That
Yeah.
the fact that she has a good voice was important to me in my characterization of her because I thought in the 1939 film, she's one of the few leads who doesn't get her own number. And
Mhm.
if she had been able to sing her wants and desires and her needs and what she would ask for the wizard if she could ask for anything, we would have had a very different feeling about her, and her death would not have been as easy to swallow as it is. So I wanted her to be able to sing. I wanted us to imagine that she had longings and needs too, even if I didn't put them out there the way Stephen Schwartz and Winnie Holtzman did.
Well, it's certainly a great contribution you've made to American literature, to world entertainment culture, to the fandom and the Oz community in contributing Alphaba to us and giving us this perspective. Certainly seeing that passage in the novel Wicked where Elphaba sings spoke to Stephen Schwartz in that he persuaded you to turn it into a musical first
Right.
before a film. Now, going back and writing this prequel, returning to the character Elphaba for the first time after, six sequels to Wicked,
Right.
somewhat, right? Or were there
Yeah.
three
Yeah.
sequels to Wicked and then
Yeah. Yeah. Six total. Yeah.
yeah, seven Oz novels, let's say. This is your eighth.
Right.
Um, returning to Elphaba now and exploring her singing, in what ways might you have been influenced by the musical?
There are ways. I try to hold it at bay as much as I can, but I do throw in a few Easter eggs, even if it's just slight turns of phrase for
Oh, I
people
saw
who,
they just serve each other between Nessa and the doll, and
yeah,
a couple other lines from the show. I'm like, does he know that's a line that's similar to the show? Like I was like, he's got to.
yeah, excuse me, I do have a little bit of a brain. Uh,
Yeah.
And uh, and so yes, there are little tips of the hat to Stephen Schwartz and to Winnie Holtzman, and even the last line of the novel is a kind of nod and a wink over the heads of the readers that I know where this is going. I know where it went already before I wrote it, as it were. Uh,
Mhm.
and yet I have tried, and it hasn't been hard. It hasn't been hard to re-emerge myself into the warm bath of my own imagination and my own feeling of what Oz is like to me. I love what Eugene Lee did to it on the stage. I love what the set designer and costume designers did to it on the film. That's not how I see it in myself. I see it as more Dickensian and more dirty, more like
Yes, I know.
More like the real, more like the
Yes,
real.
it's gritty, it is dirty. And I always, in knowing you, it's a little bit delightful in knowing you as a friend to it's a different perspective reading it than when I, in 1996 read Wicked and not knowing you and just kind of taking the word. But so it's kind of fun to relish in like, oh, Gregory's writing this, and it's so not what I hear from him in conversation, but that
Right.
his mind can develop this. It's really, really amazing.
Well, thank you. There are, and you may have asked me this before, but some people have said, are there any adumbrations upon your original story that Stephen Schwartz and Winnie Holzman brought to the story that you wish you had thought up yourself? And I used to say that I liked the character. I liked the fact that when Alpha was born on the stage in the opening number, top of Act One, that there are one or two animals in attendance at the bedside, at the mothering bed for Melina. But now that they've introduced the character of Dulcibert in the film, the nanny, who is a bear who takes care of baby Alphaba because her mother and father basically won't have anything to do with her. I think that's brilliant. And in a way, I wish I could go back and steal Dulcibert and put her in Wicked myself, but I can't. So we'll just have to live with alternate. It's fake news, but we'll have to choose ourselves which one we believe.
I get it. No, and I love Dulcimer too. I think that's a great addition. Am I projecting, or did you infuse a little bit more bomb sensibility into this novel compared to the other Wicked years in the sense of direct kernels of wisdom spelled out? Things like it doesn't matter how we're made, in the end only matters who we are. Moments like that, or also characters like Boozy, who are very much, staunchly self-possessed and self-confident, like the Patchwork Girl we see,
Right.
or other characters. Were you a little bit more in tune to Bomb this time around?
If I was, it was subconscious. I don't actually examine the hot water mix, if you will, from my imagination. I just trust. If I can trust it, I can trust it. I don't ask its sources. On the other hand, you're quite right that while Elphie is not a book for children, it could be read by uh, middle schoolers or teenagers uh, with less fear of being offended by any material than Wicked. Wicked was meant for adults, and it purposely has some uh, scenes in it that are definitely not scenes out of a children's book.
Yes.
But every child's life happens within the context of statements that are made that you have to test for validity in your own mind. Baum does that when he talks, especially in The Wizard of Oz, but to some extent in the later books as well, uh, basic principles about what is courage, where does courage exist, what is intelligence, what is heart. These are statements you can make to a child who is coming upon the capacity to think abstractly for the first time in their lives. I
Mhm.
think you're quite right, and smart on you, Ryan, for pointing it out, that Elphie does this too, because Elphaba, among the other things that she learns, she has to learn how to think in abstracts. That's part of what makes her ready to go to college. It's part of what we need in order to be functional as adults. Let's face it, not everybody can do it, but that's as far as we'll go here.
Ironically, in 8 Oz books now, you haven't written an Oz children's book, although you have written children's books in your career. Have you ever considered writing an Oz book for children?
I have not, and I think because the Oz in my own imagination is such a mirror image of our world that if I were to write a book for children, I would have to mask off huge parts of sadness, ugliness, illegitimacy, and unfairness and injustice, which are part of how I see Oz itself. Oz is a reflection of America, and it always has been from 1900 to 150 years later. Did you realize, Ryan, that as of this year, which is the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Lexington and Concord, that the Wizard of Oz is exactly half the age of our nation?
Well, I knew
I,
the Wizard of Oz was 125 years, but but
yep.
I'm not as brushed up on history, American history, sadly. But thank you
Yeah.
for wow.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I have joked for many years that Over the Rainbow really has more right to be our national anthem than anything else because it speaks about aspiration. Uh, so it's our second national anthem. Um, or to quote Stephen Sondheim, our other national anthem, I think, is Over the Rainbow. But the fact that Oz has actually been around for half the life of our nation makes it more and more capable of receiving the impressions of American culture and holding them. In that way, while I can write children's books set in America for children, I don't know that I could do it set in Oz because Oz to me has too much capacity to catch and hold and reveal those parts of our own culture that we would like to pretend don't exist.
Let's talk about the design of the book. We see Elphie, we see the monkey, and this deluxe edition, which is beautiful. We see on the spine this green serpentine, almost snake-like. In the book, I noticed there is a passage where you're describing Elphie as associated spiritually like with monkey and Nessa's snake-like. Is
Right.
this representative of Nessarose then? Or is
Well,
this
that part I didn't design. I did have a lot to do with the cover.
hmm,
And I didn't but I didn't there was somebody else's idea to come up with the spine design as the paper edge design, which I really love. And it was probably somebody who read the book and thought, well, how can we talk about the tussle between the sisters in terms of how this book looks, feels, and holds? And I think it was brilliant. And of course, it lends itself to the shape of the edges of the book.
you had mentioned in previous interviews over the years that when you were writing Wicked, originally you pictured Katie Lang almost as a muse for who Elphaba might be. Aside from Idina Menzel, Cynthia Erivo, did you have any muses in young Elphaba here?
No, and I had written the book before I'd seen the film, of course. There is a young alphabet in the first 10 minutes of the movie Wicked, and they show a very short scene of Elphaba and young Nessarose together in Munchkinland, I guess it is.
In
And
very different clothing than how they are dressed in
a
this
very
book.
different clothing, and in fact a different place, because in Wicked, Nessarose is born in Quadling Country, not in Munchkinland. Um, but if I had seen it already, it might have influenced me whether I wanted it to or not. I wrote Elphie before seeing the film, of course. I also wrote Elphie before knowing when the film would be released, and I sent it to my agent and editor on the normal schedule. I finished something, I send it out, and they send it to my editor, and then it's production and scheduling and everything having to do with the arrival of a book on bookstore shelves uh, doesn't have anything to do with me. And it really didn't have anything to do with the film. At the time that I sent the book in, filming had actually stopped because of the writer's strike, and there was no sign that it was going to start up again anytime soon. So there was quite a large chance that Elphie might actually have been published before the movie came out, and that was just happenstance. I don't mind that the movie came out first, and I don't mind that Elphie is here to tide us over between Wicked Part One and Wicked Part Two, even if there are contradictions in.
Nobody's complaining. And it's not really that contradictory, interestingly. I mean, there are visually, in terms of their dress, their location, the house in Munchkinland. But I think I wanted to ask too, like, did you send a rough copy, early draft before publication to Dana Fox, to Winnie Holzman at all? Because it's almost like they were in sync with you in that scene you mentioned early on in the film where Alphaba's being teased by the children for smelling,
Right.
and make reference in this book, Elphie, how she was unwashed and had a different odor.
I did not. I think they eventually saw, and I never sent it at all. But I
Mhm.
think perhaps my publisher sent a manuscript to Wicked, to the people who are making the film. But I think the film had already been begun in production and the script had already been approved. So it's
That's
just
happy
happenstance.
coincidence.
Yeah, exactly.
Is it true that Elphaba, Elphie, young Elphie, was inspired in some ways by your own childhood?
I think that all of my work is inspired by my own childhood. And I'll tell you, Brian, after 30 years of talking about Wicked, I have come around to being able to acknowledge in public that Alfie really is a self-portrait in some ways. Obviously, I'm not green. I don't have the voice of Idina Menzel or Cynthia Erivo or any of the wonderful
You do
actresses.
have a good voice.
Well, thank you, but I don't have their voices. Uh, and I am acknowledging that I'm sharp enough and that I'm political enough in my quiet way, but I don't have the courage in public that Elphaba has or that she has to have, because I can pass as a mild-mannered schmuck who's just going to get a bagel. Nobody looks at me and throws stones at me because I'm forgettable and I'm not noticeable. I like that about myself. But it has taken me a long time to stop saying Alphabet is better than I am. And it's taken me a long time to own that the way that she thinks and feels is the way that I think and feel. That she does come from me, childhood and adult life too. That sounds awfully pompous. And for many years I said, no, no, I'm more like her son Lear, who's inept and confused and doesn't succeed at anything he does. No, Alphabet doesn't succeed at that much either, for that matter. But Elphie the child is me the child too. Canny, curious, smart enough, very confused. But what child isn't?
Right.
Morally driven and driven by a need to explore the strength of her own mind and use it to the best of her ability. I now own that after many years in therapy.
Don't we all, right? Aside from that personality and that kind of development, are there any semantics in Elfie's childhood that mirror your own in terms of sibling relationships, parental relationships, a nanny moving around?
Uh, those are more invented. It's a tissue of lies.
Gregory, when are you giving us a Galinda book?
Well, I have one sentence of a potential Galinda book. I was
Art.
I was out walking, and three words occurred to me in sequence, and I think, oh, those are three good words. And I came home and wrote them down, and then eventually, after about a month, they found themselves in a sentence. But at the rate I'm going, somebody will have to write that after I'm dead.
Oh, come on. I'm gonna start creating an itch for you about that, especially since I have this lovely muse on my wall. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
yes.
Things. It's honestly like a prized possession. That and Toto is what I grab if the place is on fire, just so you know. Thank you so much. An Elfie adaptation, do you see that happening anytime?
We'll be curious when I get off the phone to see if movie producers are ringing me today because the book is just out. I don't see it happening, but I never say never because I didn't really see Wicked happening. I thought it'd be too big, too bold, too brash, and too improbable. But look where we are now, 30 years later.
Early November when I was in LA around the time of the premiere. And I saw
Right.
you, there was the press days, and I spoke with Steven Schwartz and Winnie Holzman, and they talked about working on more material after these movies for Wicked. I don't know if it's for stage or screen or what. Do you know of any plans, or do you see any other media, movies, stage going forward uh, post the Wicked movie?
I have not been brought into that conversation.
When you visited the Wicked set and you were there for the Ozdust Ballroom, did you visit anything or know anything from Wicked for Good Part 2?
I have not seen anything, nor have I ever been shown a shooting script, nor have I asked for it either. I did hear some years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, a possible wrinkle of plot that had been proposed at the time for the second act of the play, that is the second film. And I don't know if that's been carried out. And I don't want to know. I had decided, Ryan, that I saw too much of the part one of the film on YouTube and on all the trailers and all the interviews, etc. And while it didn't ruin the experience for me, I thought I would have enjoyed it more if I'd gone in with a blanker slate. So for
Yeah,
Wicked Part Two, I'm not going to look at the trailers and I'm not going to listen to the interview.
really. Without telling me what it was that you heard that may or may not appear in part two, did you like it? The wrinkle.
Yes,
You
yes,
did? Okay. Good to know. Thank you for that. Thank you for your time. Good luck on the rest of your tour. And when things settle down, we'll have to do a proper catch up.
absolutely. Okay. Thank you very much, Ryan. You have a great day.
Thank you, you too.
Take care.